Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon and good evening. I know that we have friends joining us from New York, London, and perhaps many other places around the world, as we often do for these lectures. We are delighted that you could join us this afternoon as the Soane Museum presents a talk by dear colleagues Clare Gough and Matthew Morgan on the friendship of John Soane and J.M.W. Turner. I'm Paul Whalen, chairman of the Sir John Soane's Museum Foundation, and on behalf of my fellow trustees, I'd like to thank Doug Wright, chair of our public program committee, and our executive director, Bill Appleton, for their work on this event. The Soane Foundation is dedicated to the vision of architect Sir John Soane and the lasting impact of his remarkable house museum in London. In addition to presenting lectures, we offer fellowships, organize study trips, and host social gatherings for like-minded fans of Sir John Soane and supporters of the museum. We've just announced our annual gala on October 22nd, and we will honor design journalist Hamish Bowles and architect Jeannie Gang. To learn more about the Soane Honors and our other programs, as well as our efforts to support the Soane Museum in London, I invite you to sign up for our newsletter on our website or follow us on Instagram. Today, our speakers will explore the intertwined story of two important artist residences and the close relationship between Sir John Soane and his friend and fellow fisherman, Joseph Mallord William Turner. To tackle the relationship between Soane and Turner, we have two friends joining us from London. Clare Gough is director of Pitzhanger Manor Gallery, Sir John Soane's country villa built in Ealing, West London, and its adjacent contemporary gallery. Clare led Pitzhanger through an award-winning conservation project to restore the house to Soane's innovative design and upgrade the gallery. She is a trustee of London's Art Fund and previously worked at the National Gallery in London. Dr. Matthew Morgan is museum director of Turner's House in Twickenham and an associate lecturer at Birkbeck, University of London, from where he also received his PhD in museum studies. He has worked in the heritage sector for 10 years, including at the Royal Collection and at the National Gallery, London. Prior to that, he was a director at Christie's. Following Clare and Matthew's talk, I'll return to the screen to help answer audience questions. And if you'd like to pose questions about the talk, as Bill mentioned, please send those questions to us through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen at any time, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Clare and Matthew to enlighten us on the friendship between Soane and Turner.
Paul, Bill, thank you so much for that introduction. So as Paul said, we're here tonight to talk about John Soane and J.M.W. Turner, two creative geniuses of their day who were also great friends. Though Soane was 22 years Turner's senior, they formed a strong bond that kept them close confidants and supportive friends from the 1790s right through until Soane's death at the age of 83 in 1837. That's a close friendship of over 40 years. Today, what we'd like to do is take a look at a number of ways in which their lives intertwined, from how they first met through the Royal Academy and the crucial role that the Royal Academy played in each of their careers, to that other major influence on each of them, Rome and the classical civilization that they discovered in Italy. We're going to look at the two country homes that they built, Soane at Pitzhanger in the village of Ealing and Turner at Sandicombe Lodge in Twickenham, and the time they spent together in the countryside and the similarities and differences between the two. But while we do this, we're going to try and draw out the ways in which each man had a notable influence on the other and helped shape their respective lives. So let's start by taking a look and introducing our two protagonists. Matthew, over to you. Why don't you introduce us to Turner?
Yes, well, there they are, in a way that would have seemed utterly confusing, I'm sure, to both men. We can now see them across the Atlantic. We have two absolutely fabulous portraits of both of these men. Portrait on our left by William Owen of John Soane. He's seated in what looks to me to be a very comfortable space. And of course, he has a book of plans in front of him. And as one might expect,
why not?
they're not just any plans, are they, Claire?
Yep.
They're his plans, which, of course, you know, even to this day in the 21st century, we might have a photo of us showing our interests, and in Soane's case, obviously, his employment. And I love the fact that in the background on his desk, ready perhaps to be used at any moment, is a quill. If he has an idea or sort of sees something, perhaps in the portfolio next to his chair, he can quickly make a change. But how different that depiction of Soane is to Turner's image that we have on our right. Only 5 years difference between these two images, but really Turner's in some ways perhaps much more modern. We can't tell from the picture of Turner, that's a self-portrait, what Turner does. There's no indication that he has any profession whatsoever. And unlike Soane, Turner is looking straight out at us. I think rather challengingly. If you know anything about Turner, you'll know that he's a man who, let's just say, never suffered fools gladly. And there is something about that, I think, in this image of him, rather daring, challenging perhaps. But at the same time, he's a young man, as Claire was saying earlier on, younger than Soane. And look at him for one moment. I mean, there's something I think rather fabulous about his clothes, about his high stock that he's wearing, his fabulous hair. His dad, being a barber and a wig maker, I'm certain had done Turner's hair specifically for this. So here we have these two men, Soane, I think, looking rather sort of nice and cheery. Perhaps that's not quite the Soane that we might know from our history books. And Turner looking like the young man about to take on the or taking on the British art world that he was in 1799.
It's perhaps interesting, isn't it, comparing portraits painted at very different stages of their lives, because obviously Soane here is established as an architect, and as you say, Matthew, very much, and you know, Soane never one to give up an opportunity to have theatrical effect. So no accident, as you say. What is the book that is open in front of him? What are the tools that are laid round behind him? But very interesting, because of course Turner at that stage, a much earlier stage in his career. I think it's also interesting just to reflect a little bit on the background of these two people, and this is maybe one of the similarities that draws them together. Both of them, people who start from humble beginnings. So Soane, born 1753 in Goring-on-Thames, and he is the son of a bricklayer. So really very much starting off life in a very humble way, but establishes himself so successfully over his career as an eminent architect, knighted by William IV in 1831. So it is a real transformation, but both of them as men from humble beginnings who perhaps therefore draw together when they become members of the RA from sort of, you know, sharing a view of sort of looking in on the establishment, maybe from a different perspective.
Absolutely. Very, very much so. I mean, Britain, Europe, still very much a place where birth mattered enormously. But the creative professions, if we can call them that, really were places where people from humble backgrounds, as Claire will say, had an opportunity to thrive. And interestingly, William Owen, who paints Soane's portrait here, has a very similar background to Soane, and Turner sadly passes away quite young. So there are a number of artists, architects, creative people who come from humble backgrounds, something that doesn't really continue into the 19th century. By the middle of the 19th century, those opportunities are sort of more or less closed down.
So what I'd love to do is talk, if we could have the next slide, I'd like to talk about a couple of major influences on Soane and how he established his career from that position. And one of them is the Royal Academy, and the second is his grand tour and his influence of classical architecture, both of which became common points for both him and Turner to talk about. So starting from this very humble position, he was very lucky to come across and get an apprenticeship from up and coming and successful young architect George Dance the younger. So he goes to work for George Dance, and George is one of the founding members of the Royal Academy, and is encouraged by Dance to go and belong to the Royal Academy and hear some of the lectures there. And he has the great fortune of entering a competition designing a triumphal bridge, and wins a gold medal from the Royal Academy. And as part of this, his prize presented by the King is to win a scholarship to go off on a grand tour, something he wouldn't have been able to afford to do otherwise. And as a result, gets paid to go off for nearly 3 years to travel through France to Rome. In fact, he never leaves Italy, doesn't go beyond to Greece. But while he's traveling across Italy, he has the great fortune of seeing not just Roman classical remains, but a huge number of Greek remains in Italy, whether in Paestum or down in Sicily. And this has an unbelievable influence on Soane. So I just wanted to share this picture here. And what you see on the right is one of the designs that Soane did of this triumphal bridge. But because it had such a huge impact on Soane's career subsequently, he later gets his colleague and companion Gandhi to draw up the bridge. And here is a rather wonderful watercolor by Gandhi, painted several years later in 1799, of the bridge, drawn from a bird's eye viewpoint. And it's rather wonderful to make it come alive. You weren't allowed to do that in the Royal Academy competition because it made it look too glamorous. It had to be an architectural design. But on the basis of that, Soane goes off to Italy. And I wanted to just show in the next slide just a couple of the influences that had such an enormous effect on his architectural designs later. Now, this is a print of some frescoes from somewhere called the Villa Negroni. Now, the Villa Negroni, many of you who know the Soane Museum will know this very, very well. They were indeed hanging in that wonderful picture behind Paul as he was introducing us. But the story of the Villa Negroni is not known by very many people. And in 1777, the year before Soane arrives in Rome, they excavate this amazing villa near the Baths of Diocletian in Rome. And it causes a stir across Europe. It is as great a discovery as the discovery of villas in Pompeii and Herculaneum. And one of the things that blows people away is that they have not appreciated quite what fabulous frescoes the Romans had incorporated in their villas. And fortunately, because very sadly, the originals disappear, fortunately, Angelo Campanella is commissioned to create images of the frescoes on the walls of the Villa Negroni. And Soane, in fact, buys a set of prints. Those are what you saw in the photo behind Paul, but also we have a set at Pitzhanger. We'll talk about them a bit later, but just looking at this picture, you can see some of the amazing influences from classical architecture on Soane, whether it be in the shapes, the wonderful classical forms, or indeed in the faux marbling in the fresco, and that fabulous red colour that we'll come on to in a minute, which is the very colour that inspires Soane to paint the room that he uses at Pitzhanger to display his pictures, his Turners. So we'll come on to how that affects things in a minute, and it is indeed a colour you'll see Soane use in lots of places, Dulwich Picture Gallery. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then moving on to the next slide, we see something else that affected Soane so much, but later also his friend Turner was just looking at the classical remains that he found across Italy and sitting down and sketching them. He was fortunate enough to meet Piranesi at the beginning of his grand tour, but sitting down and sketching the ruins that he saw was something that Soane would do regularly across his grand tour, and was a skill that he used enormously afterwards.
I don't think it's possible really in the 21st century to quite appreciate how influential classical Rome was in the 18th century. I mean, I sort of struggle to think maybe Americans going to Paris in the 1920s is the sort of closest that we might have in the sort of fairly modern era. Rome, the Romans had an enormous influence across Europe, a sort of shared culture, particularly amongst aristocrats and cultured people. that enabled them to talk about some of the same things or to think about the world in similar ways. Very, very influential. And going on the grand tour, as Soane did, and so many other young British people, particularly young wealthy people, that's also significant. The grand tour was sort of not just a rite of passage. It's not just a kind of a year out between school and university where you drink and sleep around, although that certainly did happen. It was also an opportunity to broaden your cultural horizons. And when you came back, either to Britain or wherever you came from, France or Germany, Poland even, you had met and made contacts with a wide range of people. And for an artist and an architect, so for Soane, for instance, but it could be somebody like Joshua Reynolds, this was hugely important to their furthering their careers.
I think that's absolutely
Turner,
right.
Yeah, unfortunately for Turner, and interestingly, the a prize that Soane won in 1777. Turner's only 2 years old at that point, born in 1775. So it indicates the sort of age difference that they have. And Turner's sort of slightly the wrong age. So by the time he's thinking about going on his grand tour, something else important is happening in Europe, the French Revolution, and very quickly it becomes impossible for British people to travel on the continent, unless of course they're sort of following a huge army. So Turner misses out on his grand tour, and we can only speculate what a huge impact it would have had on him. He doesn't get to Italy until 1819, when he's sort of in his late 30s, early 40s. So meeting somebody like Soane helps to broaden Turner's appreciation of the world and introduces him to things that he might not have seen otherwise. And Piranesi, particularly, is an influence not just on Turner, but a range of artists. But meeting Soane, talking about Piranesi, talking about architecture, talking about these wonderful ruins that we're looking at, becomes a very influential aspect of Turner's later works.
It's so true that the importance of the grand tour as an opportunity to meet future clients, and undoubtedly the beginning of Soane's career is built on trying to follow up those clients, not always hugely successfully. And that brings us on, I think, quite neatly to talk about, and we wanted to introduce fairly early on this afternoon, the two houses that each man built as their country retreat. Pitzhanger Manor for Soane and Sandringham Lodge for Turner. But I think what's interesting is Soane builds Pitzhanger, his country villa, when he is 46, and it's only then that he feels he's achieved the status that he now needs a country house to sort of reflect that newfound status. But it had been quite a struggle in his career getting started. So although he'd met all these wonderful aristocrats and landed gentry on his grand tour, quite a few of them kept promising him jobs and then they just didn't materialize. So it was always a piece of work. So if, Bill, we could have the next slide, please. Part of the point of building Pitzhanger is to use this country villa as a place to show off to his friends, and he hopes future clients, what he can do for them, because he's always thinking about the next job. Although he has made his name and reputation and quite a nice amount of money as architect and surveyor of the Bank of England at this time, and he uses Pitzhanger to show that. So there are lots of references across Pitzhanger to the work he'd done at Bank of England. But he's very conscious that, you're only as good as your next job, and he's constantly trying to get that. And that explains why Soane builds his country villa in Ealing, which was a village outside London. London, to those of you who know London stopped at Marble Arch in those days. So Ealing is a villa outside. Today, it's very definitely within London. It's on the tube network and surrounding Pitzhanger. You can see the expanded city of London and its Victorian villas all around it. But in those days, it was a village. And what you see here on the left is an 1832 watercolour done by Richardson for Soane of Pitzhanger in its day. So what you see in the bottom left-hand corner of the image is actually Ealing Green. So it was a house standing up against the village green. But beyond it, at the back, there is his parkland, his 28 acres of parkland with the Serpentine Lake in the near distance. And you can just about peep at the very top right-hand corner of that picture. You can see a second lake. And that was his fishing lake, where he would spend lots of time with his dear mate Turner, fishing and chatting. We sort of rather suspect, sort of knee deep in their waders and chatting about all things about the RA, about politics at the RA, and how they dealt with light in their respective professions. But just to give you a very quick introduction to Pitzhanger, there you see on the right a photo of it as it is today, following the conservation project. On the left, actually Soane buys an existing older Georgian manor that's standing at Pitzhanger and remodels most of it, except for the wing that you can see in the left hand. But what you're looking at, that lovely cube, that wonderful neoclassical Soanean cube, and that is the main building, and that's where Soane is really showing off his style. And then you see his kitchen block detached from the house so as not to risk burning it down by fire. And then right to the far right of the picture, you see a set of Roman ruins. They're not real Roman ruins, they're faux Roman ruins, but Soane wanted to following on from his grand tour, he loved the idea of Roman ruins, so he builds his own set of Roman ruins for his visitors to stumble across and see. So Matthew, tell us about Sandercombe Lodge.
Yes, perhaps we could have the next slide. So I hope you will all immediately see that there is a dramatic change in scale here. Unlike Soane's country house, Turner's country house is not a big showy offy place. It's a much more domestic, easy to grasp maybe scale of house. Turner grew up in many ways along the Thames, born in Covent Garden on the Thames, spent time with family in Brentford, a bit like Claire was just saying about Ealing, Brentford now surrounded by motorways, but then a small market town really on the side of the Thames. And Turner loved the Thames. In many ways, people talk about Constable and Constable country. I like to think that the Thames was sort of Turner country. He went up and down. In fact, he died in a house in Chelsea looking out at the Thames. And in many ways, this is why this house is located here in Twickenham, just near Richmond. He felt, I think, a very strong connection to the countryside. And unlike Soane's house, this is not a house for inviting friends, for inviting clients rather. It's only a place to invite friends. We've got no evidence that Turner invited any of his clients to the house. And I think significantly, what he also didn't do is go round to the other houses and draw them. This is a place to relax, to maybe put it, well, he's Turner, he was never going to put his pencil down, but certainly put his paintbrush down and entertain, eat food that was prepared by his dad. If you look at the picture on the right in the distance, there's somebody in a white shirt. Maybe that's his dad. His dad pretty much lived full time at the house. And we see these figures sitting on the lawn in the back of the house. Maybe one of them's Turner, maybe a lady friend, maybe they're friends of Turner's. We don't really know. There's no way for us to really know who they are. But significantly, the view by Havel, who's a friend of Turner's, is of the back of the house. And the back of the house is the best view of the house. So when you come to the house, as I'm sure you all will when you come to London, just as you'll go to Pitzhanger as well, come to the house and look at the back. Significantly, I think that's the side that only his friends would have seen. So the best part of the house, unlike Soane's house, in many ways the best part of the house, certainly the most dramatic part of the house is the front. The best part of Turner's house is the back, because that's reserved for special people. And Turner went a lot to Pitzhanger. I'd love to imagine the two of them going from their house to one house to the. Actually, in reality, Soane moved out of Pitzhanger at about the time that Turner finished building Sandycombe. So Turner,
but it was a twinkle in his eye. I do imagine that they were chatting. I know Turner had the plan to do it, so I suspect they were chatting about it while they were fishing. So let's take a look.
Certainly were, yeah.
Let's take a look at one of the rooms inside. Oh yeah, this is just one of Turner's wonderful pictures of fish.
So Turner was an inveterate fisherman. There's a wonderful letter from one of Turner's clients complaining that Turner was spending more time fishing than he was drawing or making art. Maybe not, but Turner loved to fish. He was a great sportsman of every sort. He also liked to shoot, so he loved to be outside. And I suspect that fishing for him was not just a pleasure. It was a way of connecting to other fishermen like Soane. He had other friends, John Flaxman, for instance, Joseph Farrington, who also were inveterate fishermen. And I think the social side of it was as important as the sports side of it as well. Every time I talk about this picture, and Claire has heard me say this before, I'm here because of my art history knowledge, not because of my fishing knowledge. So if there is somebody out there who can tell us which is the tench, which is a trout, and which is the perch, I'd be very grateful.
Fantastic. So let's take a look inside. Now, for those of you who know the John Soane Museum, these are a couple of views of Pitzhanger, and many of you will see obviously very, very strong resemblances. Here on the right, you've got a Gandhi picture of the breakfast room at Pitzhanger Manor, and on the left you've got a picture of it literally just after the conservation project completed in 2019, and you've got the wonderful canopy dome ceiling that Soane was so famous for, his trademark, one of his trademark ceilings. And remember, he is using Pitzhanger to show off to his clients, rather hoping that after a glass of wine over dinner, he might be able to get them to commission something from him. This wonderful picture on the right, submitted by Gandhi to the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition to show the architecture that Soane designed. And what you've got there is the breakfast room looking through into Soane's library, and there's Eliza sitting at her needlework. But if you look carefully at that Gandhi drawing, you notice something else very important that I'd like to draw to your attention. If you look on the left of the drawing, can you see that there's a stand, thank you, with a cursor, and there is an amazingly huge ancient Greek vase known as the Cawdor vase. Soane bought the Cawdor vase in 1800, just before he embarks on work at Pitzhanger. It was one of the prizes in his collection. So he designs the breakfast room at Pitzhanger to show off the Cawdor vase to best effect. And I think this is a theme that runs through Pitzhanger. It was a place for him to show off his collection, his quite eclectic but growing collection. And so as a result, because it's a 4th century BC vase found in Puglia, amazingly in fantastic condition, black vase with red terracotta figures dancing across it. And so he designs this room with lots of features, Greek features that he intentionally puts in to show off the vase, and with a faux marble grey background that will really make the vase stand out beautifully. And you can see one of those faux marble walls in the picture on the left. But if you look carefully at the picture, the photo on the left, you'll also see the Greek keystone sign that is either side of the on the mantelpiece beside by the fireplace, the caryatids in the corner of the canopy dome ceiling. Although interestingly, of course, in the ceiling, what he's done is a homage really to the Pantheon in Rome and looking out at a sunnier Italian sky. But I want you to focus for a moment of imagine, so this here you are within the canopy dome ceiling. Now imagine that you're outside looking in, and we're going to jump to the next slide and look at the entrance gate to Pitzhanger. And of course, that again is the canopy dome ceiling, the handkerchief dome ceiling, but seen from the outside on 2 pillars. And of course, that is the design that Soane then later repeats when he builds his the tomb to his wife, Eliza. And of course, the design that later in the 1920s inspires that most iconic piece of British design when Gilbert Scott designs the telephone box. But now moving on to the next slide, we'll just see Soane's library, which demonstrates Soane's other most iconic ceiling, the starfish dome ceiling. But also, if you look carefully, you can see hanging on the walls, there are the Villa Negroni prints on the walls. And of course, many of you will recognize that this is a very similar design to the design that Soane uses in number 12, Lincoln's Inn Fields, for the breakfast room. So he is, what you see at Pitzhanger is a rather fun snapshot of Soane's designs for the relatively short period he was there between 1800 and 1810. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Soane's collection, because not only does he have these great classical pieces like the Cawdor vase, but he also starts buying contemporary art. And it's the wonderful diversity in his collection that is rather special. And so in the room to the left of the library, there is a rather fabulous room that Soane paints a dramatic, strong red to show off, to make it effectively a gallery of modern masters. And in 1804, he sends Eliza off to do some buying. In fact, in 1802, she goes and buys from Christie's A Rake's Progress by Hogarth and hangs that at Pitzhanger. But then she also, if we look at the next slide, here are two pictures that she bought of Turner's.
Before we look at the next slide, can we just quickly go back to the previous slide? Sorry to interrupt. I just want to get people to sort of think a little bit about the colour on the walls here, and to sort of perhaps hold that in your mind as we sort of progress. Right, we can move forward now.
So here is one of the two pictures that Eliza buys of Turner's. Interestingly, it was a painting from 1798, but that hadn't sold, and so she buys it in 1804. And she buys this and a landscape scene that we'll see in a second of the Alps, because I think she thinks that Soane had such an amazing time on his grand tour. It was lovely to bring back memories of his travels through the Alps. But Matthew, tell us a little bit about this picture of Kirkstall Abbey.
There's a fascinating entry into Eliza's diary about buying these two paintings. She goes directly to Turner and goes and sees them in his gallery. Turner has a house in which is his studio. All his works of art, pretty much all his works of art, are produced there. The house and the studio are in Marylebone, close to in central London. If you know London at all, it's near Harley Street. And he builds at the back of the house his own gallery. Well, in those days, there were not very many picture dealers. Most artists sold their own pictures themselves. It was something that Turner turned out to be very good at. He made quite a lot of money and was very successful. He built a very fabulous, a very extravagant gallery at the back of his house. There is a lot of speculation, and I think it's not quite 100% proven, but I think it's almost certain that Soane was involved in the creation of Turner's gallery. He advised Turner, on purchasing the land at the back. He then seems to have advised Turner on some elements that could go into it, and Soane was very interested in modern elements of architecture, and so the gallery had a very innovative heating system. You don't want your rich clients to be cold at all, so that worked out very well. And Eliza goes and has a look at what Turner's got on offer. This picture, painted during Turner's first tour of the North in 1787. Turner came back, produced many works as a result of that. And Turner on that tour is becoming increasingly interested in something called the sublime. The sublime is the opposite of beauty. It's that feeling of unease, maybe even fear, terror, that comes from certain emotions. So one of the emotions that is very much of the sublime is the unknown. And this kind of underground view of collapsed Abbey, Kirkstall Abbey, pulled down virtually in the Reformation in the 16th century, is quintessentially Gothic. It's sort of something that was amazing and now isn't. And there is something a little bit sort of, what's the word I'm searching for? Uncertain, unsettling perhaps about this. There's something that was raised to the glory of God now being used by cattle to protect themselves against the elements. And it's very much at this time the kind of picture that Turner is producing, and there's a very ready market for these sort of things in Britain. And if we go to the next slide, this is the second painting that Eliza bought, completely different in many ways. So in 1802, there's a brief pause in the fighting between the English and the French. The British don't much like the French Revolution for basically lots of monarchical reasons. So they are at war. When the revolutionary government falls in 1802, there's a very brief window of peace. Then when Napoleon takes over, that window is closed very firmly. But in the brief moment, lots of artists, including Turner and many other people from Britain, rush over to the continent. And Turner goes to Paris, sees the Louvre for the first time, and then goes to see the Alps. And this picture is from that visit. He came back with many, many sketches and worked those up, some of which were directly for patrons, many of which, such as this, were on spec. It's been called St. Hugh, denouncing vengeance on the shepherd of Courmayeur, for many, many years. Like most Turner things, it doesn't quite exactly follow the story. So there's lots of speculation that actually this isn't what we're seeing. But in a way, that doesn't matter, because what really matters, I think, are the wonderful mountains in the background and the storm that we can see rolling down the valley. And this really is Turner leaning into the sublime in a very strong way. This feeling of awe, or to use a word that we don't think of in this way anymore, awesome, that we are, I think, expected to look at the mountains and think, gosh, they are amazing and wonderful and slightly terrifying at the same time.
And a painting that, a picture that Eliza, when they leave
Yes.
Pitzhanger, that keeps very close to her, and we believe is very fond of, an indication of how much Turner did feel part of the family. To Soane. Now, I'm very, very conscious that we want to leave time for questions, and so I think I'm going to suggest we sort of skip on. We're going to talk to you a little bit about light, how the two men would use light in their architecture, but perhaps that's something we can come back to in questions. But just picking up on what you were saying, Matthew, let's perhaps jump straight onto the picture of Turner's second gallery. Because it'd be lovely to talk about, here's a picture, and let's stay on this slide for a second, because here is a picture of Dulwich Picture Gallery. Now, many of you may know that Dulwich Picture Gallery was commissioned from Soane in 1811, and it was effectively the first ever purpose-built picture gallery in Britain. And Soane creates for this an unbelievable design that has become the template for many, many, many years, until we really moved into the white cube. The template for so many galleries that followed it. The National Gallery in London very much followed on these sorts of designs. And it's this wonderful way of using a roof light to light the picture gallery, and then this wonderful red light, that red colour that Soane had used on his walls in several places, at Pitzhanger, in his small drawing room, the gallery of modern masters. And he feels it's a wonderful colour to show off particularly oil paintings to their best effect. But if we go back one side, we can see Turner's second gallery.
So this is painted by Turner's friend George Jones after Turner passed away, so perhaps from memory. But Claire, you're absolutely right. Look at the skylight above, lighting the room in a period before electric lighting. The only man-made lighting that you could have would be flames, gas, perhaps, if you were very advanced. Well, that's not really going to work in a gallery. Anything that goes wrong, everything's going to go up in smoke. So natural light is the way that most galleries went, for all galleries went at this time, and still to this day, the natural light seems to be the sort of template, the gold standard by which all unnatural light is judged. I often think that in a country like England, that's not really very sensible. But anyway, that's another conversation for another time. But here's Turner with two ladies, and he's showing them the paintings that he has on view. The picture right at the back may well be Dido building Carthage, which is now at the National Gallery, which I rather like. But you can't see the heating, and that's deliberate. What would be the point if you could see it? But we know that they're reasonably warm because the ladies are not wearing any coats.
And then I want to talk a little bit about the warmth of the friendship between Turner and Soane, despite that huge age gap. As many of you may know, Soane fell out terribly badly with his sons, and there was a very awful moment for him in 1815, when there is an anonymous article published in a periodical, and Soane suspects that it is published by his son. It is criticising Soane's architecture, and it is Turner who goes with Soane to the offices of the periodical to look, and lo and behold, they identify there that it is in the handwriting of Soane's son. And at the time, Soane and Eliza say that this has been the death knell on her. And lo and behold, very sadly, Eliza does die shortly afterwards in 1815 from, supposedly, from the shock and the horror of the fallout of their family. And it is Turner who is there for Soane during these really tough moments. Turner who comes and spends, in the lead up to Christmas, spends time with Soane. And if we can move to a couple of slides on, we'll find a very touching picture of Eliza. If we can go one further on. This is a lovely story of, this is a little sketch of Turner, I'm sorry, of Eliza Soane, by John Flaxman, which was actually being used by the artist Jackson, who was about to paint a posthumous portrait of Eliza. And Matthew, do you want to tell the story of how this picture comes back into Soane's ownership?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. You mentioned earlier on that Turner was friends, I think, equally in some ways with Eliza and with John, but he was very close to both of them. And I can only imagine that Turner too was deeply moved when she passed away. Soane himself, really, it was a terrible, terrible moment for him. This little sketch found in the posthumous sale of Jackson, so he passed away, the contents of his studio were sold, and Turner saw it. Turner loved going to auctions. He loved seeing the pictures that were on view. What a great way to see pictures in a time before there were any galleries. And he saw this and immediately recognized her, and then bought it so that he could give it to his friend John, which he did when Soane was knighted. This was a special gift to commemorate his friend's success, his friend's huge success, something that I think Turner also would definitely have enjoyed, is being knighted, but unfortunately that was never to happen. But how wonderful. I think it's so sweet. There's a very common view of Turner, that he's a sort of horrible old curmudgeon who hates people, and that's really not true. And that's not true at all, maybe in the last few years of his life. But how wonderful, what a wonderfully touching thing to find this picture of your friend's wife, to buy it and to make it into this wonderful gift for them so that they can remember her as she was many years ago. I think that's absolutely gorgeous.
Very special. And it hangs, and you can see it today in the John
Yes.
Soane Museum. And then perhaps before we go on to questions, just to finish with one amazing tribute from Turner, if we can come on to this slide. 2 years after Soane's death, Turner paints this rather amazing picture, Ancient Rome. And I think what's really, really interesting in this is a tribute back to his friend 2 years after his death. So he's still thinking of him, because if you look carefully at this picture, there is the triumphal bridge that we saw in the very first slide. There is the bridge that got Soane his start on his career, on all his, everything that happened to him came really out of that grand tour, and therefore out of that bridge that won him the scholarship to go on that grand tour. So lovely to see this tribute.
Yes.
And it's interesting, I think, the influence of the two men on each other is so enormous, but Soane, as everybody knows, decides to leave his home in Lincoln Fields to the nation in a bequest. And that surely must have had an influence on Turner when he decides to do the same with his collection, which was left to the Tate Gallery in his final bequest. So we've run out of time to tell you so many other stories. I'm very happy to answer them in relation to questions. But a friendship that spanned so many years, but they had so much influence on each other, both on their work and their ideas.
I very quickly just want to say about this picture, which is, I absolutely love this painting. I can't help but feel that the theme, which is Agrippina bringing the ashes of her husband Germanicus, who dies mysteriously, probably poisoned in North Africa, and she brings his ashes to Rome, surely a sign of complete love and dedication. It must, I think, have had a resonance in Turner's mind, this story, to the love that Soane had for his wife, and I just find it very moving.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire and Matthew, for that wonderful tour through this moving friendship between these two geniuses. And I'm wondering, we do have some questions that have been posted, but I'm wondering, I know that Soane, I'm more familiar with Soane than I am with Turner, because of course I support that museum. And I know that Soane, throughout his life, when he was talking about light, he referred to it as this lumière mystérieuse, and this mysterious light that he saw in Roman ruins, and that he wanted to recreate in his architecture. And when I think of a mysterious light, that seems so apt as a way to describe and maybe look at Turner's paintings. And I'm wondering if Turner spoke about light, or about romanticism or the sublime in his paintings, or did he let his paintings sort of speak for themselves?
We sadly don't have a lot of Turner's correspondence. Many of his friends, when they died, their families destroyed all their correspondence, a very Victorian thing to do. So effectively, we don't have his voice. And you might think that for an artist, having tens of thousands of their drawings would enable us to unpick what they were thinking. Not quite so much. We do, however, have a series of lectures that Turner gave at the Royal Academy. So in 1807, Turner was made Professor of Perspective. In the preceding year, Soane had been made Professor of Architecture, and they both gave lectures. And we know that they spoke to each other about the lectures. It took Turner about 3 years to prepare his lectures. Thank heavens. For this evening, it hasn't taken us 3 years.
3 years, my God.
Yeah, exactly. And they spent a lot of time talking about architecture, particularly for these lectures, about the history of architecture, the meaning of architecture, and the impact that architecture can have. And we know that Soane was very influenced by a number of the lectures that Turner, a famously bad lecturer. Nobody could hear him. People who could hear him couldn't understand him. People who could understand the words didn't know what they meant. It was a bit of a disaster. But Soane did like those lectures, and the things that Soane was particularly interested in were issues of light. And Turner talks a lot about reflection of light on different objects, and reflection of different colors. So these were things that you can see would have huge influence, interest to Soane. Now, what we don't have, sadly, is any evidence of specifically what they spoke about. And Claire was saying this earlier on, and I think she's absolutely right. They're out fishing, they're on a boat, they're having a glass of wine, a bottle of wine, who knows? They don't need to write anything down. I don't write down what I talk to my friends about because I don't need to. And that's the process. They are sharing and learning. But light is definitely a key element in both of their shared visions.
I'll just add to that you only have to, and we didn't have time to talk about this, but you only have to look at the designs that Turner does at Sandringham Lodge, and they're so clearly inspired by how Soane uses roof lights and lighting and tinted glass to change the light, to manipulate the light, to encourage that lumière mystérieuse, and that must have come from Soane. So there was a lot of cross fertilization between the two of them.
Yeah. And I think, to get back to their friendship, Turner's a very combative person, as is Soane. And Turner takes on, some of the greats, some of the artistic greats. He takes on Rubens, he takes on Rembrandt, he takes on Claude. He doesn't really take on Soane in the same way. There is something, I think, much more collaborative about them. They are sharing in some ways. I don't think Turner's hoping to be better than Soane in a way that he's hoping to be better than Rembrandt, say. And again, I think that's a testament to the strength of their friendship.
Well, no, I think luckily they were both focused on different aspects of the arts. Otherwise,
Yes.
I think they might have gone at each other.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
both seem to be very ornery and very competitive.
Well, can I
Indeed.
add to that? It's really interesting that at Pitzhanger, it was a place of entertainment, and he would bring his friends out there for parties, but it was have a party and then go. So unlike many other country houses, there are no bedrooms for his friends. So there was bedrooms for the family, but not for the friends. So no one stayed at Pitzhanger except, we think, Turner. And there was something about that relationship that they managed to spar off each other, but still forgive each other. And we skipped over very, very briefly a beautiful picture of a painting that Turner created for Soane, for his London house
Yes.
at Lincoln's Inn Fields, and Soane rejected, and yet they still managed to get their friendship was sufficiently strong. They managed to get through that.
Yeah.
So very combative, quite sort of grumpy people sometimes, but they forged this very strong friendship.
Yeah. So for that
Wonderful.
painting, again significantly of Rome, Soane said that he didn't like it, but still paid for it. Left the picture with Turner. Turner never cashed the check. So everybody then sort of, honor was kept on every single side.
Wonderful. I happened I mean, I know that Soane used to walk to his country house from downtown London. It was about 8 miles, I think. He enjoyed that walk. And I'm wondering, first of all, how far away is Turner's house from Soane's country house, and what was that walk like? And did Turner also sort of have a habit of walking all the way out to his house, or how did that work?
I don't know how far away are the two houses, Claire? I've never really thought.
With modern transport, it's not so
Yeah.
great, but actually, as the crow flies, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
Those Georgians, they were great walkers.
They were.
It take about 3
Yeah,
hours.
they really were.
And Soane records in his notebooks that he would get up at 6, walk to Ealing from Lincoln's Inn Fields, walk to Ealing, and then rather sweetly, there's one record of him going, jumping in the pond, catching a fish, taking the carriage back and having his fish for dinner. But although, as Matthew said, Turner doesn't build Sandercombe Lodge until after, sadly, Soane has, with great regret, sold Pitzhanger because of the breakdown with his family relations. I think Turner had already found the plot and was still planning it. So I rather hope there might have been a walk between them. And I do envisage not just did they share notes over fishing, but they were walking together sometimes.
Yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful? I'm certain that Soane came to visit here. I can't imagine that Turner would have completed his house with so many Soanian influences and not invited his friend to come and have a look. I mean, that beggars belief. We don't really know how Turner got here. We do know that his dad, who lived at the house for all the time the house was owned by Turner, he, in exactly the same way as Claire's just described it, would wake up early in the morning, walk into London, which is sort of 8 or 10 miles, not on paved roads, I ought to add, to open up Turner's studio in the mornings and then walk back again. So a 20-mile round trip for a sort of elderly gentleman. He got wise to that and found that there were carriages of fruit and veg going into London, into Covent Garden, and he'd hitch a ride and pay for the ride with gin. So everybody was very happy, I think, with that.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm wondering. It's interesting to hear about them, but that they both were lecturing at the Royal Academy, and that it's wonderful that there are notes from Turner's lectures at the Royal Academy where he spoke about light and how it reflects on objects, and it makes me think about how Soane used mirrors to refract light in his architecture. Are there lectures by others at that time at the Royal Academy that would have referred to what was in the air, the sort of this idea of romanticism and the sublime? And I'm just wondering how widespread that was at the Academy at the time, or were Soane and Turner perhaps a little bit ahead of others, especially Turner?
Actually, I don't know if Soane's lectures are retained. most
Oh,
of
they are.
the
No, fortunately they are.
yeah,
We do
most
have
of the professors' lectures are kept. You may well know that the sort of tradition, as it were, starts with Reynolds, the Joshua Reynolds, first president of the Royal Academy, and his lectures are rather, I was thinking, a little bit pompously called discourses, were very, very popular. Produced as books. Turner's were never published as books. They Turner's certainly aware of art theory, perhaps we might now call it. So concepts of the sublime, for instance. We don't know if he read Edmund Burke's a book on the sublime, but Burke and Reynolds were great friends. It's almost impossible that even if he didn't read the book, he didn't know what was being discussed. And again, issues of the romance or romantic in art as well. I'm certain that Turner would have known about these. Whether they were on the avant-garde of these ideas, it's sort of hard now, I think, really to say, except to say that both of them, in the works that they produced, I suppose you can call buildings works as well, were very far in advance. If you see what other people were doing at that time, I mean, nobody really is an architect like Soane. Certainly nobody is a painter like Turner. They are doing things, they are taking these ideas into different places, conceptual and real places, that none of their contemporaries are quite able to catch up with them. And that feeds into sometimes their lack of success, sometimes a huge criticism. Yeah, sometimes people just don't get it, and feel threatened, frankly.
Right.
Of course, Soane did also get into trouble for occasionally being rather cheeky about some of his fellow lecturers. So and fell out and did recover it, but fell out with his great mentor dance, which is such a terrible shame. But they did recover it after Eliza.
Matthew and Claire, I'm putting together a couple questions that have come in. One is just you've so nicely shown how Turner and Soane influenced each other in the work that you presented, the images. But what records do we have? Do they have correspondence? Is it their diaries? Where do we know most about their relationship?
Soane kept everything. I don't think Turner did, but Soane did keep everything. So quite a lot of this comes from Soane's notebooks, Eliza's notebooks sometimes. And actually, you know, this was both a joy but a real challenge for us when we were doing the conservation project. Soane would have kept every design he did. And sometimes one of our real challenges with the architects was looking at something saying, did he actually ever do this? And sometimes we were looking at windows, whether was this a blind window or was it actually a real window? And we had to look for the evidence in the building itself to tell us, because in some of the drawings it would have been an open window and sometimes it was a blind window. So Soane kept absolutely everything. We've got receipts for purchases he bought. We know how much he paid. I haven't got it in front of me now, but we know how much he paid for those two Turner pictures that Eliza, or how much Eliza paid for them. So no, he kept absolutely everything. So fortunately, in a relationship of two halves, one half is keeping the records, the other one isn't, but we can put it together through that.
Paul and I know well from our friends Helen Dory and Sue Palmer at the museum that everything that Soane had is there, and they can lay their fingers on it in a second.
Sue is absolutely phenomenal. You know, that source of all knowledge to go and find any piece of information.
I hope this isn't too frivolous for this esteemed group, but we had one other question. If there was going to be a Netflix or an HBO series on this wonderful friendship, who would you cast in either past or modern times in the two roles?
That's a very good question.
Who's Soane? Who's Turner?
Well, they are a bit naughty, and so I'm going to say Dominic West has to be one of them. A bit naughty, occasionally sort of, you know, stood a bit too close to the sun, misbehaved a little bit, but also a bit cheeky, but very strong character. So that'd be my vote.
Well,
maybe you play both parts and sort of move back and on and off stage. That would work very well off Broadway.
We see, I do think they were very similar. I think they were very similar. And I do think, you know, Soane was very up and down. And when he was up, he would have been just fantastic company. And obviously he would have had his very black moments. And so I think there were, you know, they're probably very strong similarities.
Wonderful. And there was a very specific question that was asked, which is, where is the Courtauld vase now?
Yeah, it is in Lincoln Fields in all its glory, and you can see it looking absolutely fabulous in the dining room in Lincoln Fields. And
Oh, I know where it is. Okay, I've
yeah,
seen
and
it. I
yeah,
wasn't.
and
It
it
is
is absolutely
amazing.
fabulous and well worth. And you know, I marvel to this day that it was found intact. All those, it was discovered, we think, in 1790, and
Yes.
just how wonderful this 4th century BCE vase found intact. But it looks absolutely glorious there.
And
So what
so
we do at
enormous.
Pitzhanger, so enormous.
Yeah.
So what we do at Pitzhanger instead, because all of Soane's collection was taken to Lincoln
Yes.
Fields, today what we do is we put, just in the way that Soane did, we put contemporary art in those spaces instead to
Right.
make us look at the spaces and how they can show off contemporary art in there. So we put contemporary sculpture in the place of Caudle Vase now.
Wonderful. Any other questions, Bill? I think that might be.
I think a final question for both
Yeah.
of you is, and we don't have a lot of time, but want to give you both thanking you for your time and energy today. Just an opportunity. Is there one major thing around the corner at either home that next trip that Paul and I are in London visiting the museum that we should find our way over to your neck of the woods?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's so kind. Lovely. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, I would love to go myself. I have to say, I hope we do, and I hope that question inspires maybe somebody in this audience to put that play together. I think that would be a fabulous play, or a movie, about the friendship between these two amazing people.
Yeah.
There's so much to it. There's really is. There's
I'm seeing an 8-series
there.
biopic. This is really, it could be. There's a lot there. There's a lot there.
There we go. I'm sure there's somebody out there who
thank you so
did.
much for. Right, exactly. Thank you so much for enlightening us and in our audience. We had a really great turnout, and I've gotten a lot of wonderful comments. People have really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all.
Thank you so much.
If anybody's listening and wants to come to Turner's house or Pitzhanger, please do. Turner's house is open Wednesday through Sunday, and in July, from July until October, we will be opening our next Turner exhibition, which is the first exhibition focusing on Turner and his relationship to climate change, particularly with an absolutely wonderful oil painting, which has not been seen in public, I think, for about 30 years, of a fantastic Turner sunset. So please come if you are in London, or when you are in London, perhaps I should say.
Wonderful. And then I'm going to throw in one very quick thing from Pitzhanger.
As possible. Yes.
Sounds absolutely wonderful, definitely worth seeing. And at Pitzhanger, we have coming in July a riff off the fact that Soane bought for Pitzhanger a Rake's Progress by Hogarth, which he hung in the small drawing room alongside the Turners and the Constables that he had in there. So in July, we have coming Grayson Perry's Tapestries, Vanity of Small Differences, which are inspired by Hogarth's A Rake's Progress. So please do come and see that. I think it will tell some really fun stories to compare the contemporary work by Grayson Perry with that work by Hogarth that Soane so loved and hung here at Pitzhanger.
Wonderful.
And
so with Turner's house at Lincoln's Inn Fields, everyone in this audience now has 3 great houses to see, 3 great houses. That's at least a weekend in London, if not more. Thank you all for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you. And we thank you, Matthew, Claire, Paul, and we have a final little card here that we'll put up at the very end, which has contact information for each of the institutions. Thank you so much. We're so delighted to have the 2 of you, and we look forward to seeing you in your homes or your Turner and Soane's country home. And please come find us in New York, or find our friends well at the museum in London. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.